Welcome back with a smiling face. Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. The Edge of Tomorrow. Episode 6. Chapter 46. Only when Kate and Alex stepped into the room, did I realize the horrible mistake I had made. I had kept an image of them in my mind, committing it to memory so that I might never forget them. They looked different from that image, their eyes dark and haunted. I could see the toll my leaving had taken on them, and felt horrifically guilty. Part of me wanted to run into their arms, the other part of me wanted to cower and beg for their forgiveness. Kate's hair remained the same, short on the sides and long on the top. Alex's hair had grown, almost grazing his shoulders. Apart from the pain in their eyes, they had remained the same. Their scent filtered into the house, relaxing some of my nerves as it registered with my senses. Sage stood behind them, nodding at me encouragingly, but I couldn't force myself to move. I felt absolutely ridiculous standing here, a floor-length nightgown draped over my body. If the twins noticed my attire, it didn't show. Neither one of us moved, simply taking in the fact that we were here, together. "Oh, go on." Sage chuckled, and the light sound helped pull me from my stupor. Thalia propelled me forward, making me stumble horribly as I practically leaped at Alec and Cade. Neither one seemed to be expecting it, as they remained stiff and unmoving when I barreled into them. I slammed into the two of them roughly, my hands grasping at their shirts as I held them close. Happiness so strong I wanted to sob coursed through me as I clung to the twins to my mates. A surge of relief barreled through me, and I knew the emotion hadn't come from myself. I could taste the twins' fear on my tongue. I could taste Alex's gut-wrenching relief coupled with Cade's suppressed fear. Their emotions were a storm within me, and I savored each one as it crossed my senses. "I can feel their emotions," I murmured to Thalia, unsure what was happening. "You accepted them," Thalia sang, "you accepted our mates." A sob escaped my lips as Alec and Cade wrapped their arms around me, tightening as they heard the sound leave my lips. The coil that had been wound within me the day I moved in with Melissa had finally come undone. Even as we said nothing, their touch was the only thing I needed. The warmth radiated from their body, and I hadn't realized I had been so cold. Their heavy breaths felt like music to my ears, and for the moment, I had forgotten why I ever left. "I hate to intrude, dear, but we have some things to talk about." Sage's gentle voice filled the room, reminding me we were in someone else's house. For the moment, I had forgotten everything other than Alec and Cade. I could feel Cade's irritation at having to pull away from me, as well as Alec's reluctance to let go. Giving the two of them a watery smile, I pulled away and faced Sage. Her eyes were soft, but proud. I was sure she knew I had accepted them, had finally accepted what I was. Running was no longer an option, as I wouldn't be able to pull myself away from Alec or Cade a second time. "Sit with me," I asked, leading the two of them over to the couch Miles had once placed me on. The two of them let me lead them, tugging at their hands so they'd follow. The urge to be near them was overwhelming, and I knew the feeling was mutual. I wondered how long it would take them until they let me out of their sight, if they ever would. I sat smushed between Alec and Cade's huge builds, but I hadn't felt this happy and relaxed in nearly my entire life. While I was still horribly inexperienced with guys, and incredibly nervous around the twins, the close proximity between us felt right. I slipped my left hand into Alec's and my right into Cade's, enjoying the feel of their calloused skin against my own. Their surprise ran through me, reminding me of little iridescent bubbles. They hadn't expected me to truly miss them, to be happy that they came for me. They also hadn't expected me to accept them, to allow them to touch me so freely. I knew without prying, that they blamed themselves for my leaving, and would for quite some time. That fact made guilt spiral within me and pain pierce my insides. I could feel my face heat as both of them had their eyes glued on me, but I refused to balk under the pressure. I knew if I met their eyes, I would crumble, so instead, I let my head fall against Cade's shoulder and smiled as his chest rumbled in approval. Sage watched the three of us with clouded eyes as she took a seat in the armchair. Miles emerged from the darkened hallway and stood beside his mom, looming over her as though Alec and Cade were threats. Neither Alec nor Cade noticed Miles' presence, as they were both focused on me. "Let's start with what brought you to my house, child." Sage smiled softly, catching my eye. "Your mates need to know." I ignored the stiffening postures of Alec and Cade, but returned Sage's smile with one of my own. Even though I had just met the woman, I knew I could trust her. She had kept her own existence a secret for years, and I knew she'd extend the same courtesy to me. A couple men tried to kidnap me. They were werewolves. When I shifted, I managed to get away. They injected me with wolfsbane, but I managed to make it here before I passed out. I frowned, remembering the disabling pain of the wolfsbane as it coursed through my body. I glanced at the worried faces of Alec and Cade. As their anger flowed through me, I could taste it on the tip of my tongue. Cinnamon and clove, yet it singed my flesh as the emotions swirled within me. When I shifted, they saw what color I was. They saw that my wolf was white. As I finished, Alec and Cade's bodies stiffened, becoming hard as stone. Their emotions battered me senseless, giving me the start of a headache. Surprise, shock, anger, hate, acceptance. Each one had a unique taste, though it was hard to focus on one. "You're a white wolf." Alec was the first to break the silence, his dark eyes burned into my own with fierce possessiveness. His voice echoed in my mind, deep and alluring. It had only been a week since I heard their voices, but it had felt like years. "As am I," Sage countered, meeting the twins' eyes with a certain kind of authority. I sensed something coming, so I stayed up late. If only I had known it was another white wolf, I might have been more prepared to counteract the wolfsbane. "You were the little girl from the Bright Moon Pack," Cade pointed out, surprise laced in his tone. His voice was a little deeper than his brother's, but just as alluring and addictive. This time the surprise rushing through me was my own. There was no way Alec and Cade knew Sage personally, as she was double their age, and yet Sage smiled softly, her eyes misting over as she remembered a time before hiding. "Yes, I was the little girl from the Bright Moon Pack," Sage murmured. Miles placed his hand on her shoulder, squeezing lightly. His face was hard as his eyes flitted between the three of us. "You saved our dad's life," Alec scoffed, his eyes widening as he looked at Sage. "Alpha Dixon from the Dark Moon Pack. That's a name I haven't heard in quite some time." Sage chuckled, a gentle smile on her face. Her eyes moved over the twins before settling on me. "Would you like to hear the story, child? It is not a happy one, though my action ensured the birth of your mates." "I would like to hear it." I nodded, my voice soft. I remembered how Sage told me of the death of her family, and the death of her mate. I knew Alpha Dixon's story tied in with that of her family and mate. For a moment, I nearly refused. I could see the lingering pain in Sage's eyes, but I could also see the blazing strength. I was 16 years old. My family had lived in the Bright Moon Pack for many generations. It was a small pack, but we were fiercely loyal to one another. The Bright Moon Pack was one of the oldest packs known to our kind. When I first shifted, I told my parents, who in turn told the Alpha. The entire pack kept my secret until their final breaths. Sage began, the fire beside her crackling and spewing embers. Alpha Raymond's territory was vast, but he craved more. As you have seen, my abilities stem from the earth itself. Our land was thriving, and Alpha Raymond grew jealous. He sent spies onto our land whilst gathering his army. I was young back then. I hadn't known how coveted white wolves were. One of his spies saw me, watched me as I shifted with my mate. Little did he know, I too had seen the spy. I told our Alpha just in time, and he called on every ally he could manage. One of those allies were Alpha Dixon. He told us the story, but never quite like this. Alec murmured, entranced by the tale Sage was telling. He had always said it was his duty to help your pack. Even back then, Alpha Dixon was a good man. He was a young, untested alpha. He raged onto the battlefield with his army, tearing down enemy after enemy. Our pack worked in sync with his, we saved each other that day. My mother and father told me to stay in the house, but my mate was on the battlefield as well. I left the house, but I hadn't come in time. Sage's voice turned low, and my heart ached as I felt the pain within her words. My mother and father had already been killed, my mate too. Alpha Dixon was fighting against another wolf, but Alpha Raymond wasn't one to fight fair. He crept up behind Alpha Dixon, ready to land a killing blow. I felt something break within me that day. The earth opened, hearing the pain in my voice as I screamed and wept for my family. I directed that anger at Alpha Raymond, and watched as the earth swallowed him whole. I hadn't realized tears leaked from my eyes until Alec turned and wiped them from my face. His eyes were soft, as were his hands as they grazed my skin. Those gentle sparks caressed my face, reminding me that my fate would be different from Sage's. It was a beautiful tragedy. Sage murmured, many lives were lost and gained that day. Alpha Dixon was spared, able to find his mate and produce children. Unbeknownst to my parents and mate, I found out I was pregnant shortly after the battle. Miles is the last piece I have of Anton, and I cherish every day with him. As I looked into Miles' eyes, I tried to imagine a boy around the age of 16. His eyes were soft as he looked down at his mom, at the woman who had given and lost so much, and yet somehow managed to remain kind. "We'll keep your secret, Sage." I smiled softly, meeting the eyes of the woman who spared my mate's father. Without her, Alec and Cade wouldn't exist. No one will know about you, or this place. You have our word. I spoke for Alec and Cade, but I knew I had their agreement. Sage had suffered more than most, and deserved whatever slice of heaven she could manage. If she wished to remain in hiding, then we would do everything possible to help. Should the time come where she wanted to step from the shadows, she'd always have a home in our pack. Thank you, Claire. You are nicer than most. It seems us white wolves have painful lives, I do hope yours turns out differently. Sage murmured, her eyes soft as she looked at the three of us. You're welcome to stay here for the night. I'll have dinner ready within a few hours, and there's a spare bedroom upstairs. Thank you for your hospitality, Sage, Cade murmured, giving her a nod. We will leave in the morning. Go on and get yourselves settled in. I'll start dinner. Sage smiled, some of the light and joy returning to her eyes. Miles seemed to relax a little bit. I wasn't sure if he was beginning to trust us, but it felt better than having him glower all the time. Chapter 47. My heart sputtered in my chest as I realized Sage had meant for the three of us to share a room. Even after accepting Alec and Cade as my mates, the thought of sharing a bed with them made me horribly nervous. It took a couple deep breaths for me to realize, I wasn't sure I wanted to sleep alone. I could feel the twins' relief as they came to the same realization as I had, and knew they felt the same. My week away from the twins had felt like years for all three of us, though they seemed to have suffered worse than I. I wondered if I'd ever forgive myself for leaving them, even if they managed to forgive me first. The room was filled with an uncomfortable silence as Alec and Kate's dark eyes settled on my face. The air was full of tension as they looked at me, thick with longing and jagged with pain. I opened my mouth and then closed it, realizing nothing I said would excuse my actions. A large bed sat against the wall, a maroon quilt draped over the top. I was thankful for the size of the bed, as sleeping with two large males would have proved difficult for anyone. A fireplace was built into the wall, though it looked unused. The room itself was large, but had little furniture. The walls matched the shade of the quilt, and the carpet felt soft beneath my feet. Two armchairs and a coffee table sat at the other end of the room, followed by a bookshelf. I had forced Alec and Kate from my mind, as if was the only way I could bring myself to leave. I had spent my life not trusting a soul, only to be given two soulmates. It took the wise words of Sage to finally realize that I could trust Alec and Kate above anyone else. Besides me. Thalia chimed in, "You can always trust me. Even if you were mean in the beginning. Can you blame me?" I chuckled dryly. I spent my life thinking I was a human, only to find out the voice in my head is a wolf. I don't blame you. Thalia shrugged, though. You could have made it easier on all of us. Sensing the panic rising in my gut, Thalia sent a wave of comfort and courage through me. She helped soothe the turmoil in my stomach, helped me find the words to say to Alec and Kate. When I was finally able to form my thoughts into words, I opened my mouth to speak. I don't know if you two can ever forgive me, but I had my reasons for leaving. I grimaced, hating the sound of my fragile voice. Alec glanced at his brother, and I could feel the tension within them. The two of them were riding on my words more than I knew. It seemed they both worried I would change my mind, demand that they return me to my life without them. "We know, doll." Alec spoke softly, despite the roughness of his voice. Both sets of dark eyes were soft as they looked down at me, filled to the brim with understanding and pain. "We know why you left, we just wish you would have trusted us." I didn't want to trust anyone, I confessed, feeling the knot within my stomach slowly unravel at the confession. I didn't want this life, this responsibility. Pushing you two away meant I didn't have to deal with it all. I had planned to leave once I graduated, but things changed. My voice spiraled to a halt as I remembered the person who was directly responsible for the hastiness of my plans. Grace had been a huge motivating factor that caused me to flee town. She had even offered money to help. As I felt pure, unadulterated rage course through the twins, I knew Tori had told them after all. "We know, Tori told us." Kate's voice was lower than Alec's, and was hard with fury. I resisted the urge to shudder, and felt a shred of short-lived sympathy for Grace. "She has been taken care of, she won't hurt you again." "No one will." I wanted to push, to ask what had become of Grace, but the murderous look on Kate's face stopped me in my tracks. I knew without asking that no punishment would be enough to satiate his fury towards Grace, that neither of them would be satisfied until she was wiped from the earth. "I'm glad you came for me." I spoke softly, searching both pairs of their eyes. A brown so dark it appeared black, beautiful, and full of depth. "I know I can trust you both, and I don't want to leave any more." I stepped towards Cade, wrapping my arms around his stiff form. His anger burned the tip of my tongue, yet I savored the taste. His body radiated warmth, and there was no hesitation as his arms wrapped around my torso. "Don't leave us again," sweetheart," he murmured, his L.P.S. pressed against my head. I could hear him inhale deeply, committing my scent to memory as though I might slp away in the night. "I won't," I promised, marveling at how easy the words had left my L.P.S. I had been made for both Alec and Cade, just as they had been made for me. My instincts told me to remain with them, to cherish and grow with them. Leaving had been an act of sheer effort and will, but staying, that was all too easy. I stepped from Cade's arms when his anger had all but dissipated, seeking Alec's embrace with equal fervor. Alec did the same as his brother, planting a kiss at the top of my head. The sparks lit my skin, and I devoured every caress. I know we came off strong in the beginning, but we just couldn't resist. We tried, but that only lasted so long. Alec mumbled against my hair. I could feel the peacefulness my touch had brought them, and wondered if they could feel the emotions they ignited within me. I was not yet in love with the twins, as I never experienced that particular emotion before, but I knew how easy it would be to fall for them. After all, I had been destined to love them. At the time, I had thought they were pushy, and yet my body responded to every touch, to every bite, lick, and caress. Somehow, my body knew what they were to me, even if I refused to accept it myself. "You set the pace," Alec continued, a wry smile on his face. "We will try to contain ourselves." "Speak for yourself, brother," Cade scoffed, a dark eyebrow raised at Alec. "Self-control is not my strong suit." Things were far from over, and I knew underlying tension was still there from my leaving. The wounds that had formed within Alec and Cade wouldn't heal instantly, but I was determined to be the balm that soothed their souls. I knew little about the twins, and yet I felt like I had known them my entire life. Cade was more serious than his brother, his anger greater and more uncontrollable. Alec was the more practical brother, thinking things through instead of acting on blind emotion. The two of them were opposite sides of a coin, and they both belonged to me. The three of us headed downstairs for dinner. The smell of roasted chicken, carrots, and mashed potatoes filled the air. Dinner at Sage's house was anything but formal. Sage sat in her usual armchair, a plate of food perched on her lap as she smiled at the three of us. Miles sat at a small dining table in the kitchen, his eyes on the three of us as we descended the narrow staircase. Alec and Cade headed into the kitchen before me, leaving me alone with Sage. A gentle smile had formed on her face as she looked at me. How one woman could withstand so much pain and manage to smile was beyond me, but I appreciated every moment I had spent with her. I knew how lucky Miles was to have her, and knew she had given him every ounce of love she contained. I had long been jealous of that, of missing that with my own family. I now knew that what my family lacked, Alec and Cade would give me. They would give me a home, comfort, safety, and perhaps someday, a family of my own. In that quiet moment, with the fire crackling and heat rolling in gentle waves, I promised myself that I would stay with Alec and Cade, that we would brave the upcoming storm together. Cade handed me a plate of food as Alec followed him from the kitchen. My eyes widened at the heap of chicken, vegetables, and mashed potatoes on the plate. The food on my plate was enough to feed a family of 4, but my stomach rumbled merrily at the sight. Noticing the surprise on my face, Cade smirked. The butterflies that fluttered in my stomach brought blood rushing to my face. My blush deepened as I watched the muscles in his arm move as he handed me the plate. "You need to eat more, now that you've shifted." Cade's voice held amusement, but also a gentle fondness that made my toes curl. With a look of natural skepticism on my face, I plopped down on the couch and dug into my food. Alec and Cade sat on either side of me, taking up most of the couch with their towering build. Even with the limited space, I enjoyed the close proximity. Much to my surprise, I had finished nearly the entire plate, and watched with interest as Alec and Cade went for seconds. We stayed downstairs with Sage for the next hour or so, and I listened intently as Alec and Cade talked about their dad, the man Sage had saved. They told her how good of a dad he was, and the good he had done for his pack. Sage seemed to enjoy every word, proud that she had saved the man who fathered my mates. With my head against Alec's shoulder, my eyes continued to grow heavy. My stomach was full, and my body warm. The safety and security I felt lulled me to sleep. I was vaguely aware of the feel of a hard chest against my cheek, and the delicious scent of Alec filling my nose. His thumb moved in idle circles as he carried me up the stairs, and over Alec's shoulder, I caught Cade's gaze. Sleepy head. Cade purred, the corner of his L.P.S. turning up with the hint of a smirk. I poked my tongue out at him and nuzzled deeper into Alec's shoulder, feeling a rush through me like a gentle caress. When my eyes fluttered open, I was laying in the middle of the bed, the covers bunched around me. I watched with renewed interest as Cade slipped his shirt off, tossing it onto one of the armchairs. Alec slid in the bed behind me, making me jump from the sudden touch. "See something interesting, doll?" Alec asked, making Cade turn to meet my eyes. A vicious heat returned to my cheeks, but I couldn't peel my eyes away from Cade. A few scars lingered on Cade's chest, but it only added to his feral beauty. Creamy skin and rippling muscles caught my eye, and I wondered how I had become so lucky. I had been gifted 2 mates instead of 1, both identical yet completely unique. As Alec settled into the bed, his arm wrapped around my waist, pulling me against his body. The heat that radiated from him penetrated the thin nightgown I wore. Even with my lack of experience, it took little effort to dissolve under his touch. Cade slid in bed shortly after, turning to face me. His eyes were dark, yielding no emotion, and yet I could feel the comfort radiating from them both. This was the best either of them had felt in a week, and neither wanted it to end. "By the way, nice nightgown, sweetheart," Cade smirked, plucking at a piece of the sheer white fabric. The nightgown was old-fashioned, reaching down to my ankles, but I was grateful for the set of clothes. I grimaced at Cade's obvious amusement, choosing to bury my face into the crook of his neck. A sigh left his L.P.S., one he had been holding since I left. His arms wrapped around me, both of them holding me close as we all fought sleep. None of us wanted this to end, to go back into a world of danger and deceit. They could feel the peace Sage brought, and none of us wanted to part with it. Slowly, as their breathing evened and I leaned into their embrace, the cold that encompassed their hearts began to thaw. Chapter 48. "Time to wake up, D0LL, Alec murmured, a gentle hand pressed against my shoulder. "No," I groaned, grasping at the warmth that remained in bed. My source of heat was coming from the other man in my bed, the one who curled his arms around my waist, nuzzling his face into my hair with a content groan. The heat seemed to radiate from the twins in waves, and I noticed the thin sheen of sweat that coated my body. Cade smelled of citrus and wood, a crackling bonfire, comfort and safety. His scent lulled me into sleep, only for Alec's voice to tug me into awareness. "We have a long day ahead of us, D0LL, Alec chuckled lowly, another gentle shove to my shoulder. I mustered up the strength to open my eyes, giving Alec a half-hearted glare. Cade snored softly, his dark lashes fanned out against his cheeks. All signs of stress and anger had been wiped from his face, making him look peaceful and angelic. Cade groaned at the sound of his brother's voice, and I watched in awed silence as his eyes fluttered open. For a moment, disbelief coursed through him at the sight of me, sleeping in his arms. The next emotion to plague him was irritation at his brother, the one forcing us from this comfortable bed. 10 more minutes. Cade huffed, his voice deeper in the early hours of morning. He wrapped his arms tighter around me, his face buried in the crook of my neck. 30 minutes. I chimed in, pushing my face into the soft pillow. It seems I have another person to fight in the morning. Alex smirked, his eyebrow moved. I watched as his eyes softened, and I could feel his resolve snap like a weak thread. With a defeated sigh, Alex slipped into bed behind me, entangling our limbs once again. Alec let us sleep in for another 30 minutes, refusing to leave Cade or I alone until we were up and moving. The top of Cade's hair stood at a funny angle as he wiped the sleep from his eyes, shooting his brother a dirty look. The scent of food wafted from the first floor, and I found myself surprised that I could pick out each individual note. Maple, garlic, pepper, freshly cooked eggs, sausage, toasted bread and jam. Each scent swirled through my nose, unique yet blending together perfectly. My stomach howled in response, the perfect motivator to pull me from bed. It seems food is enough to get you both up and running. Alex snorted, an incredulous grin on his face as he watched my movements increase in speed. His eyes felt like weights as they grazed over me, running my body slowly as if to make up lost time. Food is a valid reason to leave bed. I shrugged, giving him a soft smile. As Cade sat on the bed to put his shoes on, I walked over and stood in front of him. I savored the taste of Cade's tangy surprise as it coated my tongue, running my fingers through his unruly hair. Cade's large hands wrapped around my wrists, his eyes darting up to meet my own. "What are you doing, sweetheart?" he asked, that morning growl still lingering in his words. "You had bedhead," I pointed out, nibbling on my bottom lip as a light blush stained my face. Cade released my wrists, placing one of my hands back onto his head. I smiled softly to myself, running my fingers through the strands of his hair until they remained in one place. Cade's satisfaction from my touch rumbled in his chest, and I needn't feel his emotions to know what he was thinking. "Keep doing that, and you'll have him wrapped around your finger," Alec whispered in my ear as we walked downstairs. I turned to meet Alec's eyes, reading the softness that hid within his gaze, reserved for only me. "And what about you?" I asked sweetly, my voice thick like honey. Alec's eyebrow lifted, his lips twitching into a smirk. "You've already got me wrapped around your finger, D0LL. Sage had made us a mountain of breakfast to say goodbye, and I found it hard to part with the shred of comfort I found in her home. With Alec and Cade here, I couldn't imagine a place more perfect. I wanted to stay. I wanted to let Sage help me discover my abilities, to hone my senses and figure out the details of my destiny. We have responsibilities. Alec and Cade have responsibilities." Thalia murmured softly, "We won't be alone, not anymore." I fought against the tears that made my eyes ache, fought against the pain in my heart as we turned from Sage's door. Miles walked out behind us, covering our scent as we walked down the road. Miles thought it might be smarter to stray from the forest, as the wolves who had attacked me might still be sniffing around. Alec and Cade had a car nearby, only an hour walks from Sage's house. They had stopped in town, searching for my scent, letting the mate bond guide them. It took them an hour away from Sage's house, to the forest I had ran through. From there the mate bond was stronger, much easier to pinpoint my location. "I need to stop by the bakery in town. I worked there while I was here. Beth, the girl who owns the bakery, is probably worried sick right now." I frowned, pleading silently with the two of them. "We'll stop by." Alec nodded, glancing from the road over to my face. Kate and I wanted to look around, see if we recognize any scents. The wolves who tried to take you won't be stopping anytime soon. Especially now that they know you're a white wolf. The bakery had been easy to find, as it was located in the heart of town. Everything looked so much different during the day, the colors lively and the streets bustling. The familiar smell of Beth's pastries filled the air, and I smiled at the line milling outside the store. I felt horribly guilty for leaving Beth hanging like that just as I had left Tori. I hopped from the car as they pulled against the curb, surprised as both of them followed me to the bakery. I looked between the two of them, noting the serious look on their faces. Their gruff expressions and the largeness of their build made them look like two very intimidating bodyguards. I passed the line of customers with a sheepish grin, anxiety boiling in my stomach. As I walked into the shop, I could make out Beth's irritable yell. She snapped at Jake, who in turn yelled something back. Jake's eyes latched onto my face the minute we walked into the bakery. While I couldn't feel Jake's emotions, I could see them openly flash across his eyes. Surprise, shock, relief, happiness. Each emotion lasting longer than the previous. Beth! Beth! Claire's here! Jake shouted into the back, and I watched as Beth's head popped from around the corner, her eyes wide with surprise. Wherein have you been, girl? Beth shouted, and I instinctively flinched at the tone she had used. I wasn't worried that Beth would hurt me, but I had heard her use that tone with Jake countless times. Even Jake was afraid when her voice took on that raspy demanding quality, as it was usually a sign of Beth's patience coming to an end. I found myself surprised as her body slammed into my own, her arms wrapped around me in a friendly hug. When she pulled away, a glare full of malice was directed towards Jake. The customers in the store stared on in silence, confused at the scene unraveling before them. Beth let loose a long sigh as she looked me over, her eyes burning with concern. God, when Jake told me he hadn't taken you home and then, you didn't show up for work. Beth's words were rushed, forced from her L.P.S. along with the remaining oxygen in her lungs. I thought something bad happened. Something bad did happen. I pointed out with a weak laugh. You don't think I would just flake out, right? Beth's eyes widened as she noticed the two large males that flanked me, each staring unwaveringly at Jake. I jabbed my elbow into Cade's side, who continued looking at Jake as though he were fresh meat. Alec peeled his eyes away from Jake, giving Beth a polite but tense smile. Claire, can I talk to you for a minute? Beth asked quietly, her voice a raspy whisper. I knew Alec and Cade could hear her anyway, but I nodded as though they were oblivious. I'll be right back. I told the two of them, giving them both a small smile. I followed Beth into the back, the smell of pastries filling my nose. A rack of croissants was out too cool, the crust a flaky golden brown. Even after my large breakfast, my stomach rumbled at the sight of her pastries. As a whole, I wouldn't miss this town. I would miss working at Beth's bakery, the scent of icing sugar in the air, the sound of Beth and Jake taunting and tormenting each other. This and Sage's house had truly been bright spots in an otherwise dull situation. I could feel Alec and Cade's worry swirl around me in an angry storm, lashing at my insides without mercy. They were both terrified I would leave, that I would find some way to escape, and that last night meant nothing. Two men who had probably rarely felt fear in their lives were terrified at the thought of losing me. Those two, they're not the ones you were running away from, are they? Beth whispered, her wide eyes darting out to where Alec and Cade stood. When I gave her a look of denial, she continued speaking. Obviously you ran away from home, I'm not that stupid. I just want to make sure they're not here to drag you back. No, they're not. I chuckled, shaking my head. I knew Alec and Cade wanted me back more than anything, but I also knew neither would force me if I truly wanted to stay. I wasn't sure I would physically be able to stomach the pain that would cross their eyes if I had refused to leave, refused to be with them. I left for a lot of reasons. Alec and Cade weren't part of it. They came to talk some sense into me. And did they? Beth frowned, looking somewhat disheartened. Are you going back home? I'm sorry, I really am. I frowned, hoping I hadn't lost the first friend I made in this town. They were right, I shouldn't have left. You care about them, both of them. Beth noted, an eyebrow raised as the word both left her P.S. I do. I nodded, swallowing my obvious nerves. Are you sure about this? Beth asked, you won't be going back to whoever made you leave, right? Not a chance. I shook my head, reminding myself to talk to Alec and Cade about that. They'll take care of me. You don't have to worry. Oh, I'll still worry. Jake's my brother, worrying is something I've done for years. Beth snorted, speaking of, feel free to chew him out for not taking you home. Somehow, I have a feeling you've already chewed him out pretty good. I snickered, glancing over at Jake who seemed somewhat disturbed at the glare Cade was throwing his way. I deny nothing. Beth grimaced, what exactly happened to you? I know you wouldn't miss work like that. I called the police, but they wouldn't do anything until 48 hours were up. I basically almost got kidnapped. I shuddered, it's a long story, but I got away. Here, take my phone number. Beth shouted, darting over to one of the silver prep tables. She pulled a pen from a little wicker basket and grabbed a sheet of paper from the printer in the back. I'd like an explanation someday, if you don't mind. Maybe Jake and I can visit. Is there a bakery in your town? Maybe someday. I giggled, unfortunately, there isn't a bakery. The town could definitely use one. Why not open one yourself? Beth smirked, her eyes darting over to Alec and Cade. See if your boyfriends are willing to fork over the money. I'm an amazing business partner. Even though I already had enough responsibilities on my plate, an image formed in my mind. A life with Alec and Cade helping them take care of their pack, my downtime spent running a bakery that I owned. Something I could put my heart and soul into, something Melissa, Frank, or Garrett couldn't touch, couldn't ruin. It wasn't a picture-perfect scenario, but it was my life, my family. That's not such a bad idea. I smiled softly, pulling Beth in for one last hug. Thank you, for everything. You've helped me more than you know. Beth gave Jake a break from the register, taking over so I could talk with him. Guilt was evident on his face, but I hadn't an ounce of blame to place on his shoulders. The werewolves had found me in this town, and sooner or later they would have made their move. Nothing would have changed if Jake had taken me home. Your friends are intimidating the customers. Jake pointed out, casting a brief glance at Alec and Cade. Both of my protective mates had their eyes on me. Cade's P.S. twitched into a frown. Judging from their influx of emotions, neither knew what to make of Jake. A friend, co-worker, boyfriend, something more? They hadn't a clue what I was up to the week I stayed in this town. The strange glimpse I had into their emotions helped me understand their actions, understand that they weren't being intentionally overbearing and protective. They were both still hurt from my leaving, and those wounds wouldn't heal overnight. I think my friends are just intimidating you. I snorted, my eyes narrowing as a group of giggling girls passed Alec and Cade, their eyes roaming over every inch of skin. The customers seem to love them well, some of them do. Jealous. Jake chuckled, "Now I see why you've turned down every guy who's asked you out." "Two guys, really, Rory? That's kind of weird." "It is, but I wouldn't change a thing." I shrugged, a crimson blush staining my face as Alec and Cade picked up on my words. Their eyes snapped over to where I stood, Jake long forgotten. I slapped Jake's shoulder, a flimsy glare on my face. "And I told you to stop calling me Rory. And I stopped listening when you told me to stop calling you Rory." Jake shrugged, a lopsided grin on his face. The grin only lasted a couple seconds before it fell entirely. "I'm sorry about the other night. I should have taken you home." "Don't worry about it, really. This would have happened either way, it wasn't your fault." I reassured him, a friendly smile on my face. "I'll see you around sometime. Do me a favor, try not to piss Beth off too much while I'm gone." "You couldn't have asked for something more realistic." Jake grumbled, pulling me in for a somewhat awkward goodbye hug. I left the bakery feeling as though a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, even though I was returning to a town where most of the population disliked me. Alec and Cade provided me with a sense of safety I had never felt before, only solidifying the guilt that had been looming over my head. "You've made friends here in such a short amount of time." Alec spoke softly, his voice out of place with his muscular build. "Are you sure you want to leave?" Alec and Cade were experiencing guilt of their own, among other emotions. Alec felt as though they were tearing me away from happiness, when in reality, they were my happiness. Now that I had accepted them as my mates, I wouldn't be able to find happiness in this town without them. I wanted to be with them to go wherever they went. I made the mistake of leaving the first time. I admitted, the guilt in my stomach coiling and uncoiling as I looked between my two mates. I could see the hurt deep within their eyes, the hurt they both tried to cover. "I won't make that mistake again. Wherever you go, I go." Some of that hidden emotion leaked through their eyes, and for once I wished we weren't outside on a crowded street. I wished we were alone, just the three of us. I wished I could wipe the hurt from their eyes, the guilt from their veins until there was nothing left, until I was the only thing left. I slipped a hand through each of their own, squeezing gently as I pulled the two of them to the car. Something across the street caught my eye, a familiar face. The guy who had accompanied me on the bus was standing just across the street, a cell phone placed to his ear. Even from this angle I could make out his face, the features that kept me company for that long bus ride. Justin. Chapter 49. Justin. Another friend from town? Alec asked, his eyes glued to Justin who hadn't yet noticed us. No, I shook my head, my voice filled with unease. I met him on the bus leaving town. He said he was coming from Florida, and that he was heading to Virginia. I wonder what he's doing here. This is a long way from Virginia, Alec grunted, his eyes narrowing. Just then, the wind shifted. A thick breeze wafted across the street, and I watched as Justin's short hair ruffled under the current. His scent hit me like a ton of bricks, and I wondered how I hadn't noticed it before. Justin, he was one of the guys who tried to kidnap me. My words set many things in motion. Justin's head snapped up, his eyes meeting mine, filled with what looked like surprise. Cade was across the street before I could blink, moving faster than I thought possible. Justin turned on his heel, his cell phone clattering to the ground as he took off through a crowd of tourists. Cade barreled through the humans, sending them scattering into the grass and onto the road. My heart jumped in my chest as the two of them vanished in a thick crowd of people, heading towards the dense forest that surrounded this town. His phone, he dropped his phone. I scoffed, grabbing Alec's hand and darting across the road. The cell phone was somewhat beat up from its fall, but remained in full working order. I swiped the screen with my thumb and grimaced as it asked for a 4-digit password. Crap! I sighed, it needs a password. Let me see it. Alec replied, we have a friend back at the pack who's good with electronics. He might be able to get into it. I handed the phone to Alec and turned my eyes to the remaining crowd of people. They had all long forgotten that Justin and Cade practically bulldozed through them and resumed meandering through town. My shoulders were tense with worry, my eyebrows creased at the thought of what might happen. Even though I accepted Alec and Cade as my mates, I knew little about them as people. I hadn't a clue if Alec or Cade could defend themselves, though I hoped their huge builds weren't just for show. Would I know if something happened to Cade? Would I feel it like I feel their emotions? Don't worry, Claire. Alec faced me, his voice incredibly soft though his eyes burned with rage. Cade will get him. You're sure he was one of the men that attacked you? I'm positive. I nodded, meeting Alec's hardened eyes. I hadn't noticed on the bus, but when the men attacked me, they smelled different. I stepped into his arms, pressing myself against his side for support. Anger rippled through him, burning the tip of my tongue as his emotion wafted over me. I could feel his rage ebb and flow under my touch, my presence taking the edge off the razor-sharp emotion. Alec turned his head to where Justin had once stood, inhaling deeply, a grimace etched onto his face. Justin's scent still lingered, as the wind had not yet chased it away. At first smell, it was the normal scent of a male. Musky, and somewhat earthy. As I focused on the thick layers of Justin's scent, I could pick out something odd about his smell, like he needed a really good bath. It wasn't quite body odor, more like the smell of a dirty animal. He's a rogue. Alec grimaced, his eyes flashing murderously. What would a group of rogues want with you? I don't know. I admitted, they said their boss wanted them to pick me up. That could be anyone. Alec sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Alpha's really any werewolf who needs something done can employ rogues. They'll take bare minimum payment for whatever you need done. So, it could have been anyone who hired them. I sighed. And worse, they know you're a white wolf. Alec's words came out in a low growl, they'll never stop now that they know what you are. You're worth too much. I couldn't help but tense up at what Alec had said. I had made my decision, and knew running would solve nothing, but it was somewhat daunting to realize what my life had become. I would be hunted for the rest of my life, just like Sage, for something I had no control over. As though he could feel my stress, Alec turned and held me close. His intoxicating scent filled my nose, manly and rich as it calmed my frayed nerves. Butterflies danced in my stomach at the close proximity between us, along with the rush of gentle calm that flowed from Alec. It's not your fault, D0LL, Alec murmured, his L.P.S. against my forehead. The sparks that danced across my skin, paired with Alec's soft voice, soothed me further. We'll keep you safe. They won't get their hands on you. I trust you, both of you. I sighed, it's just I used to be normal, well as normal as I could be. I'm not complaining anymore, but it's still a lot to get used to. I know. Alec's hand cupped my face, lifting it so my eyes met his. Dark and endless, he stared at me with an intensity that made my toes curl. Cade and I will be with you through it all. We're not going anywhere, Claire. You don't have to go through any of this alone. Alec had a certain kind of gravity around him, one that pulled me in and claimed me as his own. I found myself wanting to be closer to him, to seek comfort from him in any way I could. Maybe it was the mate bond pulling us closer, I wasn't sure, but I wanted more of him. They both had come all this way for me, yet neither had forced me to return home. They respected my decision, and despite the hurt that lingered within them, they understood why I had left. That was more than anyone had ever given me, and somehow, I knew they weren't done giving. They both would give me every last piece of themselves until they had nothing left, and what scared me the most was I was willing to do the same. I stood on my toes, raising myself closer to his towering height. Alec's surprise danced across my skin as I grazed my L.P.S. against his. Alec and Kate had been my first K.S.S. At the time I had been completely overwhelmed by their attention, but now I craved it, all of it. The sparks tickled my L.P.S. as I brushed them against Alec's, and I smiled as his arms wrapped around me protectively. Alec made no move to further our K.S.S., letting me explore his L.P.S. with my light inexperience. When I pulled away, a breathtaking smirk had formed on his face. A light happiness danced in his eyes, and as the sun hit his dark hair, I realized how startlingly beautiful he looked. Like he was chiseled from stone, created just for me. "You're going to make Kate jealous, D0LL, Alec murmured softly, tracing his thumb along my bottom L.P. An alpha's jealousy is much worse than your average werewolf. I'll have to owe him one," I said somewhat breathlessly. "Believe me, he will hold you to that." Alec smiled, a genuine smile. It was like a light shined within him, breathtakingly beautiful. The high-pitched chime of a phone went off, and the two of us stiffened. The carefree moment between us vanished with the cool caress of the wind. Justin's phone was ringing, a restricted number popped onto the screen. Alec answered the call, pressing the speakerphone button as the two of us listened in anticipation. "Did you find her?" The voice was that of a male, rough and deep but also raspy. The voice wasn't as deep as Alec or Kate's, but it was clear the voice came from an older male. I glanced at Alec, whose face darkened. I saw no recognition in his eyes, no indication that he knew who was speaking on the other end of the phone. "No, and you never will." Alec snarled, "But we will find you, and you will have wished you never touched what was ours." The mystery guy ended the call, and the two of us fell into silence. Alec held his rage within him, a murderous sort of calm falling over his features. Once again, a phone rang, this time belonging to Alec. He answered the call and placed the phone against his ear. I could hear Kate's rough voice on the other end. Their conversation lasted a total of 30 seconds before Alec hung up. "He caught him, he's got Justin." Alec smiled, though it was one of murderous anticipation. "He's going to head back to the pack without us. There's no way we're letting Justin within sniffing distance of you. What will happen once Kate brings him back to the pack?" I frowned. I knew little of this new world, but some things were blindingly clear. Alec and Kate had a sort of feral dominance that radiated from them in waves. Werewolves took care of their own, and seemed to live by their own set of laws. The title of Alpha wasn't just for show, which meant Alec and Kate's word was practically law. They wouldn't be lenient on Justin, and there certainly wouldn't be a trial. They would exact their own form of justice on Justin, and anyone who dared try to hurt me. "He'll be questioned, and if he's smart, he'll talk," Alec grunted, placing his hand on the small of my back as we crossed the road and headed to the car. "Will he be TD?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Alec paused, and though his eyes were hard, they softened as they caught my uneasy gaze. "Yes, he will be TD." Alec nodded. "This might make you uncomfortable, but we're different than humans, we run things differently." Alec held the passenger door open for me, letting me climb inside before shutting it. I sat in silence for the entire drive to the airport, mulling over what he had said. What I hadn't told him is that the thought of Justin hadn't made me uncomfortable. I found it somewhat sickening, and wanted to be far away when it happened, but a large part of me expected it and worse, accepted it. Somewhere deep within me, I knew werewolves weren't lenient, that they didn't believe in simply imprisoning someone for the rest of their lives. Punishment meant death. Chapter 50. Alec and I drove the hour to the airport in comfortable silence. It gave me plenty of time to stew in my anxiety. Not only had I ran away from Alec and Cade, but I had left Tori. Part of me desperately hoped she would forgive me, but I wouldn't blame her if she couldn't. After all, she had done nothing but support me, and I had still left. Alec and Cade seemed to understand my reasons for leaving, though the pain still echoed in the back of their minds. I hoped Tori would understand as well. It was a reunion I was both anticipating and dreading. I hadn't given much thought to Garrett and how he would feel about my leaving, nor did I care. He had gone about everything completely wrong. From using me for my future position, to breaking the news that I wasn't human. From the very beginning, he had never been a father figure in my life. He had never wanted to see me, just me as I am. He wanted the werewolf version of me, the version where I stepped up and took control of his pack. I wouldn't go back to that, to being controlled and used. I have one condition if I'm to return. I cleared my throat. Alec's head snapped over, his eyes searching my own. I had his full undivided attention, which I would have appreciated if it weren't for the fact that he was driving down the interstate. The intense look in his eyes made my stomach flutter. I had never captured someone's full attention before, rendering everything else useless. Name it. Alec nodded, his eyes flickering back to the road for just a second. I could feel a slight twinge of worry that bounced around in his head. He was worried he couldn't fulfill my condition, that I would make him turn around and bring me back to Beth and Jake. He would, I knew that much. If I asked, he would turn right around and take me back. I'm not living with Garrett. I shook my head, or Melissa and Frank. I'm not going to be used by anyone ever again. We never planned on bringing you back to them. Alec shook his head, the corner of his lip turning up in a smile. A single dimple appeared on his left side, and I basked in the sight. His eyes had a sly glint in them, one that made me curious. I could feel his relief at what I said. It swirled around his mind and soothed the jagged edges of the worry he had been feeling. I assume Garrett won't like that. I snorted. Melissa and Frank won't care. They probably haven't even noticed I left. Melissa noticed. Alec replied in a tight voice, the muscles in his jaw working. His irritation scratched at the back of my throat, and I wondered what had happened while I was gone. I'd be surprised if Frank noticed much of anything. Garrett will not be happy, but his happiness is irrelevant. She noticed? That's a surprise. I chuckled dryly. I do have some things at Garrett's house that I'll need to get back. Cade and I will come with you. Alec nodded, his eyes softening. We won't let you go there alone. Isn't there any way I don't know, refuse taking over his pack? I frowned. He has another daughter, she can have the pack. Unfortunately, you can't. Alec frowned. As strange as it sounds, you're bound to his pack through blood. You're bound to our pack through the mate bond. I don't want to rule a pack. I sighed, I never wanted to. You won't rule alone, Claire. Alec smiled softly, Cade and I will be there every step of the way. We'll help you with it all. That's what mates are for. I think you'll surprise yourself. Ruling is in your blood, it would come naturally to you. You'll both help me? I asked. Somehow the prospect of ruling an entire pack sounded more reasonable with Alec and Cade. I wouldn't be expected to do everything alone, to learn everything on my own whilst being a pawn to Garrett. Alec and Cade had experience, had parents who had once done the same. If anyone could help me without using me as a pawn, it was Alec and Cade. Of course. Alec smiled, a genuine smile that made the dimple on his left cheek appear. Our parents ruled the pack long before Cade and I were born. We grew up learning how to handle it all. The words unspoken drifted between Alec and I, bouncing around my head. Any children we might have, they would also be raised learning how to run a pack. The thought made my stomach twist, though it wasn't a bad feeling. If you want, we could combine the two packs. Alec continued, it would be completely up to you. Instead of watching over two separate packs, they would become one. Our territory would mix with his people would become our people. I thought over what he said for a few moments. Out of all the people in my life who tried to manipulate and control me, I had never gotten that feeling from Alec or Cade. My instincts were telling me to trust them, to rely on them for whatever I needed. Even in the midst of all the confusion in my head, that one thing was clear. I could trust Alec and Cade with absolutely anything. I would like that. I nodded, giving him a genuine smile. Usually the female would become Luna, while the male becomes Alpha. You're the sole heir to your father's pack, which makes your future mate the Alpha. Alec explained, we wouldn't take total control of the pack, it would be the three of us making decisions. I trust you both. I nodded, and no words had ever felt more right. Relief washed through Alec like a cool tidal wave, and I smiled to myself as his hand found my own. His hand was warm as it grasped my own, and I could feel the comfort the touch brought to both of us. We arrived at the airport within the hour, and Alec booked us the earliest flight back home. Back home it had never been a home before, but that had changed without my knowledge. I was sure Alec and Cade could take me to Antarctica and that would quickly become home. Anywhere with Alec and Cade was home, regardless of who else waited. So, you know about my family. Tell me about yours. I questioned, settling into the comfortable seat of the plane. Where I had just enough money to book a flight out of town, Alec had paid extra for better seats. I didn't want to know how much first-class tickets were, and I hadn't asked. I wondered how being an alpha of a pack made you wealthy, and I added it to the long list of questions I already had. A television was bolted into the far wall, playing some soundless talk show. There weren't many people in this wing of the plane, just a few lounging back in their own seats. A woman pushing a cart had stopped at our seats, and I happily took a bottle of soda from her hands. Alec took one for himself, flashing me a smile that made my toes curl. We have no other siblings, but we do have quite a few cousins on my mom's side. Alec shrugged, Mom and Dad ruled the pack until Cade and I stepped up. Usually, you wait until 18 to take over, but Cade and I were ambitious. We took over around a year ago. For the longest time, our parents didn't know what to do. Twins are highly unusual for werewolves, even more so for an Alpha and Luna. They weren't sure who was going to take over. Werewolves don't usually have twins. I asked. It wasn't a common occurrence for humans, but sometimes it happened. No, never. Alec chuckled, Cade and I are the first set of twins born from a Luna and Alpha. Cade's older by a minute, so they assumed he would take over as Alpha. Why didn't he? I asked, my tone curious. Cade and I have always been inseparable. We've never fought, and always shared everything except for women. Alec grinned, it's hard to explain, but we were both meant to take over the pack. The fact that you're both of our mates proves that even further. Do your parents know? I cleared my throat uncomfortably. Do they know about me? No, not yet. Alex shook his head, a gentle smile playing at his lips. We'll have to tell them once we arrive home. Kate and I will not hide you from anyone. You're their Luna, they will love you regardless. Anxiety churned in my gut as I had yet another reason to worry about coming home. Tori would inevitably be angry with me, Garrett would continue trying to control me, and I had to meet Alec and Kate's parents. Would they react the same way? It was unheard of for two men to share a mate, and here I was. They will love you, Claire. Alec smiled softly, his rough hand grasping my chin as he brought my gaze to his own. Your family now. Melissa, Frank, and Garrett can't reach you anymore. Family. That word reverberated in my mind, warming my insides and soothing my fear. Family had been something I always wanted. My grandma was family, though my time with her was brief. Melissa and Frank were the farthest thing from family. Even Sage, in a way, felt like family. I held a connection with her that went far beyond blood ties or friendship. Sage and I were the same, and my soul recognized that as much as it recognized Alec and Kate. I could feel the truth of Alec's words circling my heart, and felt a sense of relief I hadn't experienced in many years. I was no longer stuck in a miserable, inescapable situation. I didn't have to run or hide myself from anyone. High on the sense of freedom I never had before, I leaned over and placed my lips against Alec's. His surprise was tart like a lemon, followed by happiness so sweet, I pressed myself closer. This time Alec took control, his lips moving against my own with such tenderness. His hands cupped my face, drawing me closer. I smiled as his teeth nipped at my lip, gasping when his tongue followed suit. We pulled away when our lungs burned, begging for oxygen. Alec's eyes were blown wide, awe bleeding through his gaze as he looked at my flushed cheeks and swollen lips. His hands remained on my face, tracing gentle circles along my cheeks and jaw. Now you okayed too? Alec chuckled, earning a genuine smile in return. Chapter 51. Once we got back into town, Alec picked up a rental car to drive the rest of the way. After a half an hour, the buildings began to look familiar. Anxiety churned in my gut as we drew closer to town. I rolled my L.P. between my teeth, something I often did when I was stressed out. There's nothing to worry about, Alec reassured me, flashing me one of his dimpled grins before turning his attention back on the road. Garrett won't get his hands on you, and Grace is out of the picture. You won't be anywhere near Melissa and Frank either. It's not them I'm worried about. I sighed, when I ran away, it wasn't just you and Kate I left behind. Tori. Alec nodded, his eyes on the road. I could feel the echo of pain deep within him, suppressed yet present. Leaving had hurt Alec and Kate more than I could have ever understood. She was more worried than anything, but I can't speak for her. I don't blame her. I shook my head, for being upset, I mean. It was my fault. You did what you thought was right at the time. Alec grimaced, and I nearly flinched as his underlying pain seeped to the surface. None of us can blame you for that. I didn't know you guys could help. I admitted, ending my sentence with a little snort. Although, now I understand why you and Kate are so massively large for high school seniors. Massive. Alec mused, flashing me a sly grin. If you want to see massive, don't finish that. I shook my head, face flaming. Not to worry, once we get home, I'm sure Kate would love to hear about how massive you think we are. Alec's smirk widened, his dark eyes flashing playfully. I sunk lower in my seat, avoiding the heated yet playful gaze of Alec as my body reacted to his words. It's not like I haven't been intimate with the twins, yet each time had been so overwhelming, even before I was aware of the mate bond. Their touch was all-consuming, chasing away the most troublesome thoughts from my mind. When they touched me, all I could think about was wanting more of them. After what felt like seconds, we pulled into town. The town was nestled in the middle of the dense woods, far from prying eyes. I now understood why someone would build a town so far out in the forest. The thick woods gave the perfect coverage to shift without anyone seeing you. The town itself was quite beautiful, much nicer than the town the humans lived in. The buildings were all shiny and new, clearly well taken care of. Within minutes, we were driving down the street where Alec and Cade's house sat. Their house was the largest in town, with a long wrap-around porch just out front. It was as nice as Garrett's newly built house, though Alec and Cade's home felt more lived in. Garrett's house reminded me of a show home, beautifully decorated, but cold on the inside. My stomach dropped as we pulled into the driveway of Alec and Cade's house. My eyes were glued to Tori's house, which was just a few houses down the block. Her driveway was empty, she must have not been home. Swallowing the nausea, I let Alec open the door for me and followed him into his house. The foyer was large, an intricate crystal chandelier hanging from the ceiling. The house wasn't cold and extravagant like Garrett's. This house was luxurious, but actually felt lived in. My eyes scanned the pictures on the wall, instantly seeking out a young Alec and Cade. Both were chubby toddlers, with dark tufts of hair on their head. Each picture seemed to show them a couple years older, up until what looked to be this year. My head snapped towards the open kitchen as I heard voices filtering through the house. Alec gave me a light smile and tugged me forward. My legs threatened to lock up, yet somehow, I managed to follow after him. The kitchen was large, big enough for a family of 10. It had 2 stoves, and a refrigerator with a large screen. I hadn't been to a house quite this nice, and found it hard to believe I'd actually be living here. Cade was the only person I noticed, looking much like he had when we left Beth's bakery. His hair was tousled, and he had changed his clothes. A blush spanned my cheeks as I wondered if he too ended up naked after shifting, if it was a common occurrence among werewolves. Cade turned and met my eyes as though I were a magnet walking into the room. A genuine smile formed on his face, one that nearly took my breath away. I heard Alec chuckling lowly behind me as I wrapped my arms around Cade's waist. The shock they felt whenever I willingly touched them was always mixed with just a hint of awe. Cade's arms snaked around my waist, and I felt his L.P.S. press against my hair. "Miss me already, sweetheart?" Cade asked, one of his dark eyebrows raised. A light voice cleared their throat and I stiffened as I realized we weren't the only people in the kitchen. A woman with wheat-colored hair and crystal blue eyes, her figure was slim as was her face. The man sitting next to her was the spitting image of Alec and Cade. Dark hair, dark eyes, broad shoulders, and a large build. Alec and Cade's mom was watching the 3 of us, her eyes curious but not judgmental. "Are you going to introduce us?" Their mom scoffed, though a smile played at the edges of her full L.P.S. "I swear I didn't raise you boys without manners." "Mom, Dad, this is Claire." Cade chuckled lowly. "Our mate." "Our?" their dad asked, his eyebrow raised in an expression that was nearly identical to his son's. The sight made me want to laugh, as I now understood where the 2 of them had gotten their serious yet playful looks from. "Our?" Alec nodded, the hint of a smile on his face. "And is this what you needed to talk about last week?" their mom asked softly, her eyes remaining on me. partially. Cade shrugged, giving my hand a gentle squeeze before wandering through the kitchen to where 3 large platters of food sat. Through my anxiety, I hadn't smelled the thick scent of food wafting through the kitchen. My stomach rumbled angrily, making Cade smirk in my direction. Cade lifted the lid to one of the platters, grabbing at a piece of steaming food. "Don't you dare!" Their mom snapped, waving her hands at Cade as she chased him off. The sight was one of the most amusing things I had seen. Cade towered over his mom by at least 1.5 feet, yet he trotted away at the wave of her hand. Her L.P.S. were set in a tight line, though her eyes twinkled with amusement. This is what a family is supposed to be like, I thought to myself. It was clear from the gentle touches and quiet words, that their parents loved each other greatly. I assumed they were also mating, though I wasn't entirely sure. It seemed in the werewolf world that one always ended up with their mates. "You boys are sure she's both of your mates?" their dad asked, his intense eyes on me. "We're sure." Alec nodded, one of his arms snaked around my waist, tracing little circles on the small of my back. Their dad's eyes narrowed into little slits as he stared me in the face, making my heart rate skyrocket. I couldn't feel any emotion bubbling from him like I could with Alec and Cade. For once, I felt somewhat blind. I couldn't tell what was churning behind his dark eyes. "Your eyes look familiar," their dad grunted, his face losing that crippling intensity after a few short moments. "There's a reason for that." Alec cleared his throat, shooting a quick glance over to Cade, who happened to be creeping closer and closer to the food. "She's Garrett's daughter." If I had thought their dad was intense before, I hadn't seen anything yet. Their dad's eyes widened, his L.P.S. set in a grim line as he looked me over. Even their mom looked stunned, and somewhat worried. She placed a hand on her husband's arm, giving him a gentle nod. "I didn't know Garrett had a kid." Their dad grunted. "Yeah, me either." I blurted the words out without thinking. It would have been nice to know I wasn't human 17 years ago. Alec and Cade's dad snorted, before letting out a low chuckle. I could feel the approval radiating from Alec and Cade, along with pride and another intoxicatingly sweet emotion that I couldn't quite place. "Well, we sure have a lot to talk about." Their mom chuckled lightly, the tension leaving the room. "Care to stay for dinner, Claire?" I sent Alec a brief look, wondering if they knew I was hoping to live here. Alec gave me an encouraging nod, his eyes telling me we'd talk about it later. I turned to their parents, 2 people who held nothing but genuine concern for their sons. I realized then that I wanted them to accept me, I wanted it more than anything. I couldn't leave Alec and Cade a second time, and I wasn't sure I could handle more people fighting against me. Instead of succumbing to the nerves boiling under my skin, I mustered up a kind smile and nodded my head. "Sure, I'd love to stay." Chapter 52. I followed Alec and Cade into the dining room, noting how different it looked from Garrett's. Alec and Cade's house were just as large and extravagant, but it felt more like a home. The twins had spent their entire lives in this house, and it showed in every floorboard and piece of furniture. The dining room was large enough for a large group of people but felt bright and cheerful. I followed the twins over to the end of the table, blushing as Cade pulled out a chair for me to sit. I was wedged in between them, with little room, though I didn't mind. Their dad sat across the table from Alec, while their mom pulled out the many platters that had been sitting on the kitchen counter. As she uncovered the platters, my stomach roared at the sight of roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, an array of vegetables, and steaming rolls. It was more than enough food to feed 5 people, but I remembered what Alec and Cade had said about werewolves eating more than a human. Regardless, someone Alec and Kate's size would need to eat a significant amount of food, whether they were human or not. Kate was the first to reach forward, snagging a buttery roll from one of the platters. His mom caught the action and snorted, rolling her eyes at her son. Alec lifted my plate from the table and began piling food on top, flashing me an innocent grin once he was finished. "You'd think I never feed them." Their mom chuckled, her eyebrow raised as she watched Kate inhale the steaming roll. "I was so excited when I heard I was pregnant with twins. If only I knew how much food I'd be making." "We're not that bad," Alec smirked, piling food onto his own plate. "You say that, but there's a reason you made Claire's plate before your own." Their mom chuckled, giving their dad a hard look as he too was piling food onto his plate. "They're still growing." Their dad shrugged, taking an extra roll from the center of the table. "What's your excuse?" Their mom snickered, eyeing her husband's plate with amusement. "Werewolves don't stop growing until they're at least 54. Their dad nodded confidently, though a smile twitched at the corners of his lips. "This is what family is supposed to be like," I thought to myself. Alec and Kate continued bickering at their mom, who in turn bickered back. The light-hearted teasing was amusing, and soon their dad jumped in. Their mom did an incredible job at handling 3 fully grown werewolves, especially 3 males. It was obvious how close-knit this family was, and it was strange how easy it felt to be around them all. "This will be our family too." Thalia nodded. "Someday, they'll be our children's grandparents." "All right, too personal." I shook my head. My relationship with Alec and Kate isn't anywhere near this stage. "It'll happen regardless." Thalia scoffed. "They were made for us." "They were, but that doesn't mean I want to talk about my future children with you." I shook my head. Alec sent me a curious glance, most likely noticing the blush that had formed on my cheeks. I pushed the thoughts of any future children aside, and gave him a reassuring smile. Gentle sparks slithered up my leg as Kate's hand grazed my knee. Their mom and dad seemed to catch everything, every silent look or interaction that happened between me and the twins. Their dad leaned forward, his eyes curious. "So, you're Garrett's kid. You got his eyes, though I'm sure you're aware of that already. Are you older than Caddy?" "I am." I nodded, swallowing my nerves. "He's been hell-bent on getting me to take over his pack." "And how do you feel about that?" Their dad asked. "Taking over a pack, that is. Especially when you've spent your life as a human." Their mom placed a gentle smack against her husband's shoulder, who gave her a gentle shrug and an apologetic grin. The more I watched the two of them interact, the more I knew they were mates. Their brief glances at one another held a familiarity and passion that I knew little of. They had spent years together, had children together. That kind of bond couldn't be replicated, and I wondered if mine would grow over time. If someday I would look at Alec and Kate as though they were a part of me, an extension of myself. "We haven't even introduced ourselves, theology." Their mom scoffed, turning her gentle eyes to me. "You can call me Callie." "Now we're introduced," Theo grunted, giving his wife a playful grin. He turned his attention back on me, and it took me a few moments to realize he expected an answer. Well, I wanted nothing to do with it at first. I grimaced. Things have changed, though I still don't appreciate being manipulated by him. If I do take over his pack, it'll be on my terms. I won't be a puppet, especially to the likes of Garrett. Spoken like a true Luna. Theo nodded, some of the tension leaving his eyes. "And you do understand that someday your future pack will mix with our own?" "I understand." I nodded, feeling pride radiate through Alec, while surprise wafted from Cade. I met Cade's surprised stare, nearly losing myself in the intensity of his dark eyes. Theo's mouth opened to say something more, but a knock sounded on the front door. Theo patted his wife's shoulder and walked out of the dining room. The increased capabilities of my senses continued to surprise me as I heard the front door open and a low, familiar voice speak. Garrett stood at the front door, insisting on being let in. "I know she's here, Theodore. I know they brought her back." Alec and Cade's dad spoke lowly, and I could hear the underlying wave of anger in his words. For whatever reason, Alec and Cade's dad did not like Garrett. I silently prayed to whatever god listening that their dad would slam the door in his face. My stomach dropped as two sets of heavy feet walked through the house, towards the dining room. Garrett stood in the doorway to the dining room, wearing a slate grey suit and dark, shiny shoes. His chestnut hair was combed back, his eyes bright with surprise. His eyes were identical to my own, one a brilliant shade of blue, the other a rich brown. He stepped into the dining room, meeting my eyes with repressed intensity. I could see the words bubbling on his lips, and I grimaced as I waited to hear what he'd finally say. "You left," Garrett noted, his eyebrows furrowed. For just a moment, I wanted to laugh in his face. The surprise burning in his eyes was funny in a horrifically sad way. He had left me as an infant, barged into my life 17 years later just to tell me I wasn't a human, that everything I knew and thought were lies. He expected me to willingly lead his pack, with him pulling the strings. He hadn't expected me to leave, to slip away in the night. He truly thought I would do exactly as he planned, all because he had a crucial part in making me. "You noticed," I replied, unable to hide the snort in my words. "I guess we're both full of surprises, Garrett." Garrett's eyes hardened, and I braced myself for whatever entitled remark that might spew from his mouth. "You had me and your mother worried." "Melissa?" I scoffed, my jaw dropping. Since when has Melissa ever been worried about anyone other than herself? Some of the anger faded from Garrett's eyes as a tired sigh left his lips. "Your mother cares in her own way. Melissa's never cared, not once. Nor has she ever tried to prove otherwise." I shook my head. "We'll finish this conversation at home." Garrett sighed, almost looking like a concerned father. The stress in his eyes invoked little guilt within me. Garrett had never cared about what upset me when he shifted in front of my eyes and demanded I take over his pack. Why should I feel guilty for leaving? The only people who deserved an explanation were Alec, Cade, and Tori. Home, as Garrett so eloquently put it. His luxurious house that felt withered and dead inside. No laughter, no familiarity or comfort. Even after spending an hour in Alec and Cade's house, I could feel the warmth radiating from every picture on the wall, from every stain or chip on their furniture. Garrett's house was a tomb, a prison cell. "I'm not living with you, Garrett." I shook my head, catching Alec's reassuring gaze. "One of my conditions on coming back here, was deciding where I wanted to live." "You let her have conditions?" Garrett grimaced at Alec and Cade, his blue eye darkening to a deep shade of navy blue. "What did you expect them to do?" I snapped. "Knock me out, stuff me in the back of a car and drag me back, kicking and screaming? Unlike you, they respect my choices." "Where will you live, Claire?" Garrett asked darkly, his voice unnervingly calm. "With Melissa and Frank? Or will you hope your mate's parents will allow you to live here?" Under the table, Cade gave my leg a gentle squeeze, while Alec looked towards their parents. Callie's eyes were not on her sons, but on me. Concern and interest filled her eyes, and through her gaze, I could see how compassionate the woman truly was. She turned her eyes to Garrett, and I watched them harden before she opened her mouth to speak. Claire is welcome to live with us. Callie replied in a polite, yet clipped tone. It seemed Theo had no disagreements with his wife's words, and gave Garrett a brief nod. I'll be over tomorrow to get the rest of my things from your house. I nodded at Garrett. We'll talk then. Garrett replied, turning to Theo. Thank you for letting me inside your home. A rush of air left my lungs as soon as the front door closed. A weight I hadn't noticed was lifted from my shoulders. I hadn't been able to feel it dragging me down before, but now that it was gone, I felt like I could finally breathe again. I wasn't sure what to expect when I had finally seen Garrett again, and though our conversation was far from over, I felt like things were slowly looking up. Chapter 53. Once Garrett left, the tense aura that filled the dining room slowly dissipated. Callie let out a long sigh, followed by a brief head shake, as though she were trying to wipe the memory from mind. Theo grimaced at the dining room entrance, as though he could still see Garrett standing there. I meant what I said, Claire. Callie smiled softly, you're more than welcome to live here. It sounds like you don't have anywhere else to go. I don't, I shook my head, I have Melissa and Frank, but they're not an option. Well, while we have 2 guest rooms, I have a feeling you'll want to stay with one of my sons. I don't see why the 2 of you couldn't move into one room with Claire. Callie mused, and I nearly choked on the piece of chicken I was eating. Cade chuckled lowly, making my face flush the color of a tomato. Even Alec had a playful light burning in his eyes. I wasn't expecting Callie and Theo to be so understanding. Most parents would never feel comfortable with what she was suggesting, but Callie seemed unfazed by the potential events that could occur in that particular bedroom. I was sure she could tell exactly where my mind had gone, as a playful light similar to her son's had crossed her gaze. It's normal for mates to sleep in the same room. Callie pointed out, so long as you're using Protect Mom, we understand. Alex snickered, waggling his eyebrows at me. Just making sure. Callie put her hands up in defeat, the guest room down the hall has a bigger bed, the 3 of you might want to make that your permanent bedroom. I can't help you with the closet space though. It'll be just fine. Alec nodded. Speak for yourself. Cade murmured, his dark eyes flashing playfully, Claire is quite the bed hog. I am not. I sputtered, giving Cade an incredulous glance. She really is, isn't she? Alec mused, why would such a little thing need so much space? Her kicks hurt though. Cade nodded, bruised my knee the other night. The 2 of you are nearly triple my size. I glared at the 2 of them, if anyone hogs the bed, it's one of you. Even with the playful bickering between us, a nervous flutter sounded low in my stomach. I would be sharing a bed with Alec and Cade for the 2nd time. While nothing happened at Sage's house, I wasn't sure I could say the same for their own home. I hoped Werewolf hearing wasn't that good, as I didn't want their mom and dad to hear everything that went on down the hall. The thought sent an intense blush to my face, running down the length of my neck and shoulders. You might want to get your thoughts under control, D0LL, Alec murmured in my ear, his warm breath sending a chill down my body. Werewolves can smell the arousal of a female. This time I did choke on the food in my mouth, a sputtering cough leaving my L.P.S. as I grasped for my glass of water. Cade lifted it before I could, placing it in my hands with a wicked grin, one that definitely made me question the events of tonight. Cade had once said, his self-control wasn't all that strong. The thought of being intimate with Alec and Cade had never been one I frowned upon. I had been attracted to them the moment I met them. What worried me most was, I wasn't sure I was ready to go all the way yet. What was even more worrisome, I wasn't sure I'd stop them if things did get that far. Thankfully, Alec and Cade's parents were engrossed in a conversation of their own, undoubtedly giving the three of us some time to ourselves. After finishing dinner, I helped Callie clean the table and kitchen, all while thanking her a million times for letting me stay. The three of us headed up to one of the guest rooms, and I marveled at the size of the bed. The room itself was huge, more like a suite than a simple bedroom. The room had its own bathroom, set with a large tub and walk-in shower. I eyed the bathtub hungrily. I couldn't remember the last time I had an actual bath, one in a clean tub. Alec and Cade went to grab a set of clothes for themselves, returning with something for me to wear as well. Cade headed into the bathroom, and I listened as he turned on the faucet. A few minutes later, he returned to the bedroom, taking my hand as he pulled me from the bed. "I saw you staring at the bathtub." Cade smirked, but his eyes remained soft. "I figured you might want a bath." "I wasn't staring." I grimaced, though a soft fluttering sensation erupted in my chest. Cade had ran the bath for me, and from the small bubbles dancing along the water, he had put soap in the water as well. The action made me realize how little I truly knew them, but I was more than excited to learn everything I could. I wanted to learn everything I could about my mates, my fiercely protective and honorably kind mates. Alec and Cade left me alone in the bathroom, something I was grateful for. I wasn't quite sure if I had the confidence to strip fully naked in front of the two. The door shut softly behind me, and I stripped out of the clothes Sage had let me wear. A t-shirt and a pair of shorts sat on the small bench in the corner of the bathroom. From the size of the clothes, they were definitely Alec or Cade's. I slipped into the steaming water with a gentle sigh, letting it soothe my tense muscles. I stood from the tub once the water had gotten too cold, drying off with a towel, and slipping on the clothes they had given me. The t-shirt went down to my knees, and the shorts were no better. The shorts fell to a pile at my feet, a pool of black mesh. There was no way they'd stay on my waist. Feeling somewhat bold, I tossed the shorts on the bench and left them forgotten. When I left the bathroom, Alec and Cade were nowhere in sight. I took the opportunity and slipped under the plush blanket that sat on top of the bed. I tugged the hem of the t-shirt down as far as I could, covering my bottom easily. After a few minutes, Alec and Cade entered the room. "Sorry, Dad needed to talk to us." Alec nodded. "He's going to want to talk with you tomorrow." "With me?" I squeaked, eyes wide. "Is something wrong?" "I doubt it." Cade shrugged. "Garrett's a prick, so Dad's wary that his daughter happens to be our mate." "Garrett's clearly pissed." Alec snorted. I watched in stunned silence as Alec pulled his t-shirt off. Rippling muscles danced along his stomach. His biceps flexed as he tossed the t-shirt to the floor. Cade did the same, and I was equally enamored at the perfection of their bodies. Cade had a few nicks and small scars along his torso, but it only added to his alluring perfection. Alec caught me staring and flashed me a grin, letting his jeans fall to the floor. I turned my eyes at the perfect moment, not willing to give him the satisfaction of catching me looking that far down. Cade took a shower first, letting Alec take one shortly after. Steam poured out from the crack at the bottom of the door, spewing their musky scent into the room. Deep and rich, woodsy with just a hint of spice. I inhaled deeply, noting how their scent was no replacement for their physical touch. Cade slipped into bed as Alec hopped in the shower. I felt his eyes on me and turned to face him. I watched as the corner of his L.P. twitched, raising in a smile. My eyes trailed along his sharp jawline, on the shaved sides of his head, and up to the long patch of hair that dangled down his forehead. I remembered what Alec said earlier, how I owed Cade. My stomach fluttered at the thought, and I did what I could to shove my nerves down. They were my mates, after all. I was positive neither would mind me touching them, and yet every time I looked at them, I couldn't imagine how these two men belonged to me. Much like Alec had, Cade stiffened as I leaned forward, my breath fanning across his L.P.S. His surprise was sweet on my tongue, and I let my L.P.S. graze along his own. Plush and soft against my L.P.S., he let me explore the curve of his Cupid's bow. After a few seconds, I could feel his self-control snap like a weak tether. Cade's rough hands gripped my face softly, pulling my L.P.S. against his. He left me breathless, panting for more as he ran his teeth along my lower L.P. "What was that for?" Cade asked, eyes hooded as he looked down at me. His bare chest was rising and falling at the same speed as my own. "I owed you." I smiled, my eyes darting to the bathroom door as Alec stepped out. "I miss all the fun." Cade chuckled, raising an eyebrow at Alec, who smiled innocently. Alec slipped into bed behind me, his chest against my back. I let the warmth from the two of them seep into my skin, and I couldn't name a single moment where I had felt this relaxed. Alec planted a single kiss to my shoulder before resting his head on the pillow and turning out the light. I listened quietly, my mind racing as their breathing evened. All of the stress was wiped from Cade's face as I watched him sleep. His L.P.S. were slightly parted, his breath falling in swift pants. His dark eyelashes fanned out, grazing his cheeks. I wanted to turn, to look at Alec while he slept, but I didn't want to wake them. Sleep refused to claim me, and Thalia was no help. She insisted on completing the mating process, but refused to tell me exactly what it entailed. From the images she was putting in my head, I knew the mating process had to do with S*X. Thalia was relentless, nearly begging me to wake the twins, insisting they would give me anything I asked. I found myself sucked into my own thoughts, remembering how it felt to have their hands on my body, their rough fingers gliding across my cool skin. I remembered how it felt as I had come undone on Alec's fingers, the husky words they murmured in my ear. Alec's arm was draped over my waist, but as he shifted in his sleep, I couldn't suppress the shiver that racked through me, nor could I stop the devious thoughts that came to mind. I stiffened, remembering I had left the basketball shorts in the bathroom. The t-shirt they had given me was plenty long enough to cover my important bits, but had risen as we all got into bed. Realization blossomed in my eyes. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.